My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Lewis Carroll, Video 12, The Gnat's New Story, G-N-A-T, a character from the original Alice books. The Gnat's New Story, Part 2. So here's my book, John and Lewis Carroll, wonderful. Picture of John on the cover looking into a hole in the ground. A door opens up in his backyard, and there are a whole bunch of tiny faces peering out. Here's the summary. As John the writer sits beside his pond, polishing a chapter of his new book, a door opens up in the grass, and the characters from Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass peer up at him from the darkness. John tumbles down, down, down through a hole in the ground to Wonderland, where the characters are busy rehearsing scenes from a third Alice book, which they hope John will persuade their author to write. But what if their author, Lewis Carroll, has other ideas? So, in an earlier video reading, I explained that in my novella, John and Lewis Carroll, wonderful, John interacts with the Gnat in chapters 4, 6, and 8 of the inner story. Let's look at the second chapter, chapter 6, in which John interacts with the Gnat. So the Gnat is from the original story, but he says he's not like the other characters, and John can't figure out what he means by that. Let's go to chapter 6, page 37. Here it is. So John and the Gnat, G-N-A-T. The Gnat keeps cornering me. He seems to be quite aggressive for such a small what? For such a small creature, I would say. For such a minute Alice character, anyway. Of course, the shortest, the smallest, are often the most aggressive in the human world. Before you arrived, John, we, all the Alice characters, John, reached a complete accord. We all agreed on a story, one in which we would all appear. A straight line, single plot, suspense tale from beginning to end. And every one of us would have equal time on the page. So that's John's first encounter with the Gnat. Here's the second. A simple murder mystery, John, the Gnat is telling me. One that would take place in a drawing room. All of the characters, all of us, would be seated on chairs. We'd be questioned by a detective. Someone innocuous, bland, without interest, who would ask a question of each of us, of each of the Alice characters, and then fade away into the wallpaper, with each Alice character left to dominate the scene. This would require a non-Alice character, of course. The shallow sleuth, John, the myopic detective, the blind inquirer. Can you think of anyone who could be cast as a character in such a throwaway, wafer-thin, no intelligence or talent required, bland as the major attribute role? A cipher, a zero, a naught? Someone, John, who is bland to the hollow core? Well, John wonders what the Gnat is up to. He continues on. Who had been murdered? Who was the victim, whether dispatched with a gun or a knife, whether with poison or by sudden fright? All would be left to our author, Lewis Carroll, to decide when he would write the new Alice book. The only criteria, the only necessity, the only demand that we would make is that each of us, each Alice character, would be allotted an equal amount of ink, whether by gallon or by liter, for a bravura performance in a bask in the spotlight, scenery-chewing role. Okay, that's the third encounter with the Gnat, and here's the fourth in this chapter. But just between us, John, the Gnat looks around and then leans in closer. Just between us two, neither you nor I is, let's face it, naive, or jejune. Equal minutes is being murdered by unequal hours, John, as you and I stroll through Wonderland. stabbed in the back as he cuts a future novel into equal bite-sized parts. The trail of blood leads down the corridor. Stars new hung on the dressing room doors, glorious reviews and splendid bouquets. Each character looking in the mirror and seeing a Bernhardt or a Dusa, a Forbes Robertson or a Grimaldi or an Edmund Kean, seeing each word of the future novel as center stage. Despite the agreement, despite the story of witnesses taking turns in a drawing room, I know for sure that every character takes you aside, John. Every Alice character, and Alice the character too, is shredding the collective agreement. The solidarity accord is jumping, Sovki put, out of the plummeting, punctured, sabotaged air balloon, and is telling you a personal story packed with heart and sorrow and pain that will, if you make that character's case, John, if you do as each character hopes, influence the mind of Lewis Carroll. It will give that character the biggest role, John, the biggest role in every chapter, the biggest role in the new Alice novel, and relegate all the rest of the Alice character stories to a place, a boneyard, a scrap heap in the shade. So, what is the Gnat up to is the question in John's mind. In an earlier video note on the idea structure of this novella, John Lewis Carroll, wonderful, I suggested the forming of agendas as a major plot device. Let's consider the development of the topic of agenda forming from Chapter 2 to Chapter 6. In Chapter 2, John listens to the requests of the entire group of Alice characters. In Chapter 3, he's taken aside by one of them, the Mock Turtle. In Chapter 4, he hears the request of the Queen of Hearts. In Chapter 5, he hears the request of Tweedledee. And here in Chapter 6, he hears the request of the Mad Hatter. So they all greet John as a group, but they all take him aside individually. What's going on here? Every one of these characters has an agenda, which they hope John will help them to put into action. So let's look at the variations of the concept of the agenda that there can be. Okay, so there are 4 variations here. Number 1, there can be shared agendas in which all have the same dream. That seems to be the case in Chapter 2 when John meets all the characters at once as a group. Shared agendas. Number 2, there can be separate agendas in which people have separate dreams. That seems to be the case when the characters take John aside, one in each chapter. So that's number 2, separate agendas. Number 3, there can be umbrella agendas in which people will, with separate dreams, help and support one another as they work towards a mutual fulfillment. So umbrella agendas, all separate but all under the same umbrella. That would provide a happy ending for this book, if that's the case. And fourthly, there can be opposed agendas which do not allow for cooperation but demand conflict between one or more agendas, as the success of one means the defeat of the others. That's kind of the standard pattern of most books, I would say. Opposed agendas. If one wins, the other must lose. And if the other wins, the one must lose, right? Conflict. Opposed agendas, number 4. So shared agendas, separate agendas, umbrella agendas, opposed agendas. This is Chapter 6. The story of this novella isn't over yet. Let's think of the topic of the forming of and perhaps the reforming of agendas as we look at John's adventures in Wonderland in the remaining chapters of this novella. As the reader moves through the story, as the characters explain their dreams to John, the reader will wonder whether John will be forced to champion one of the agendas over the others, in a case of opposed agendas, or whether John will be able to champion all of the proposed agendas in a case of umbrella agendas. So, will this book have an unhappy or a happy ending? Now, I've said that every Wonderland character has an agenda. So far as Chapter 6, the Gnat has not told John what his own agenda is going to be. Will the Gnat perhaps be the one to help John with his agenda, the pleasing of all the characters? or will he make John's agenda harder to fulfill? So are John and the Gnat going to be partners, or are they going to be opposed, mighty opposites? Well, tune in and you'll find out. So here again then is my book, John and Lewis Carroll, Wonder Fall. It's available on Amazon where there's more information. My publisher's website is Rocks Mills Press. There's more information there. On my website, johnpassville.ca, there are 2 free books. My planning notebook, in which I plan and write the novella, during which I kept notes, and my reflective journal, which I wrote while I was polishing the novella, which contains all kinds of thoughts that a writer has when working on a book. So have a look at johnpassville.ca for free access to those 2 books, the planning notebook and the journal. Just click on the cover icon and they're there on your screen. And lastly, I'll say thank you for watching this video.